ACE Venture. We're all very excited about this. Thank you, Turner & Townsend, for hosting this. And with that, I will turn it over to Lisa to start our first International ACE Venture. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Paulette. Appreciate it. We've got a nice little presentation for you here, and we'll do some introductions in just a second. But first of all, thank you all for joining. We're excited about this as well, and happy to share some of the great work going on by our colleagues in other parts of the world. We've got an introduction page here in just a minute. We'll let Simon and Daniel introduce themselves. But ahead of that, if just a kind of courtesy for the meeting, if you don't mind, if you could just please make sure you're on mute, and we'll leave the presenters on video for the time being. And if you're not presenting, it might help to kind of slow down the bandwidth a little bit if you turn your video off. But with that, we'll go ahead and open it up and go through the presentation. So Daniel, Simon, if we could go to just the contents page, please. Yep, so we'll today what we'd like to share is we'll go through introductions of myself and my colleagues, and we'll give you a little bit of an overview of Turner & Townsend, who we are. Talk a little bit about our education sector experience, and then Daniel and Simon are going to take you through the project, a case study on the project, show you a little bit of a time lapse on it, as well as some fun facts on the project, and then we'll leave it open for questions at the end. So just some quick introductions on this page. Simon, if you want to start off.
Yep, thanks, Lisa. Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining today. My name's Simon Kearney. I'm a director in the Sydney office for the cost management team. I'm also the Australia New Zealand commercial developer lead. Done?
Yeah, I'm Daniel Butterick. I'm a director in the education team for Turner & Townsend. I've been in Sydney now for about 4 years, originally from the London office in Turner & Townsend. So a direct transfer from our London office. I've been here 4 years, came traveling here about 8 years ago, did the East Coast, which is quite famous over here in terms of for a lot of travelers and backpackers, and decided that I couldn't stay away. So here I am after another 4 years.
Thank you both, appreciate it. And I'm Lisa Woodruff. I'm a vice president with Turner & Townsend. I manage our Nashville office, and I'm also our global head of retail. I'm a registered architect by background, transitioned from the architecture world into the project management world, I guess slowly but surely over my career. Been with Turner & Townsend about 10 years now, and historically have worked with ACE for many years. I was an ACE mentor in the St. Louis area years ago before moving to the Nashville area, and have been a mentor for the last couple of years here with ACE Nashville. And I also sit on the advisory board for ACE. So happy for any of us to answer any questions around our career and how we got to where we were at the end. If there's any questions around that, we've got some time at the end for that. So I think with that, we'll go to the next slide and just talk a little bit about who we are. Thank you very much. So we are a global business. We're an independent business, which sort of sets us apart from some of the other consultants that do some, similar to what we do. We work across a few different segments, which we'll talk about here in a minute, but we have 111 offices, 45 countries around the world. I think one of the great things that I've enjoyed about Turner & Townsend is just like this session today, it's very easy to call on our global colleagues and exchange ideas and share knowledge. And that is really also something that our clients value in us. Again, we're independent. We do specialize in program management, project management, and cost and commercial management, as well as advisory. And there's really 3 key segments, including real estate, infrastructure, and natural resources. Just a few global highlights. We have just under 7,000 people. Again, 111 offices across the globe. 1,280 million in terms of revenue, and operating across 45 countries. Just under 12,000 active projects across the globe. And I'll talk a little bit about our segments, the 3 that I mentioned on the previous page, just to share a little bit about what those mean. In terms of real estate segments, that includes several different sectors. So it could be working for the defense. So for example, in the US, the Department of Defense. It could be a retail type project. So whether that's automotive retail or clothing retail. And then the rest of those listed there: health, education, as well. Any type of commercial, whether that's developer commercial project or corporate commercial project. We do a lot of government work around the world as well. That also falls under the real estate segment, and then as well as high tech and manufacturing, which is quite the growing sector for us here, especially in the US. In terms of infrastructure segment, that includes rail, air, roadways, or power and utility companies. And then in terms of natural resources, that includes oil and gas, as well as mining and metals. And oil and gas could be anything from upstream, working on oil rigs out in the ocean, to the downstream, which would be gas stations for many of our clients. And then with that, and I don't know, Simon, Daniel, if there's anything else you want to add as well, but if not, we can jump into your slides.
No, I think we'll just, if there's any questions on us or a bit more about Turner & Townsend, and you want to know more about our career or more on Turner & Townsend, we can pick that up at the end once we've gone through the case study.
We've got a bit of a video here which just showcases some of the projects that we're working on globally. We might skip a little bit just at the beginning, just because it's quite a long one, but we'll probably do about 1.5 minutes of it, just so that you can get a flavour for some of the projects that we're involved in.
I'll leave it there. That probably gives you a good flavor of who TNT are and sort of the projects that we are working on globally. Just probably touching on what Lisa said, you can probably see there's a lot of variety, a lot of range in terms of the different sectors and segments that we cover. So, and the different parts of the globe that we do cover. So the video probably goes on for another 5 or 6 minutes, but I thought it's probably a good introduction to give you on what we actually do. In terms of today and where we are and where myself and Dan sit, obviously just to give perspective of where we are, we're the other side of the world, if you like. It's a Thursday at 9
a.m.
So we are quite a way ahead of you, everyone over there. We are based on the east coast of Australia in Sydney. In terms of our presence in Australia, we are all the major hubs across Australia in terms of Sydney, Brisbane, Melbourne, and into New Zealand. So we may be the other side of the world, but we do, and we can pick up on this, we do pick up some great projects over here. And to Lisa's point as well, good way for us to connect back into our colleagues in the UK, the US, in Asia and Africa. So this is basically a good indication of where we are and a bit more perspective on exactly where this project is. So you may or you may not know, Sydney, east coast of Australia. The project that we'll be talking to you today about is in Parramatta, probably 30 minutes by train to the site. Parramatta is classed as the second city to the Sydney CBD. It's the population growth over in Parramatta is starting to grow, and every year it's getting bigger and bigger. There's new developments continually to go up in Parramatta. So it's a city that is constantly expanding. There will be a new airport that gets built out just slightly past Parramatta. And I think with that, Parramatta is just going to go even bigger and bigger. So it is a big urbanized population, and one that will continue to grow. So today, and you've probably seen on the slide, we'll be talking about the Arthur Phillip High Rise School. So as I've just touched on, why do we go vertical? Why in these countries where we've got human urban density are we building schools that are vertical? We all know schools are supposed to be big open spaces with large playing fields, but I think you can see that the statistics are showing, and these are statistics for primary and secondary students just in Parramatta alone. So we're talking over the next 10, 20 years, population growth in students is going to be skyrocketing in Parramatta alone. So I think that our client, the New South Wales Department of Education, has decided, based on statistics, that a school, which was an existing school, which was probably only accommodating 400 students, the existing Arthur Phillip School, this is the site that we're going to use to go vertical. And you can probably see on the picture on the right there, the school is literally bang in the center of Parramatta. The train station, I think, is just slightly to the north, which is the main thoroughfare for commuters coming into work. And this is probably going to be a school that will probably accommodate up to 2,500 students once complete. So it's the first of its kind in Australia anyway. I know this is it's common in the likes of Hong Kong and Singapore and the UK, where schools are built vertical and space is of a premium. So it's not a new concept for the rest of the world, but for Australia it's new, and this is one of the first that's taken place in Australia. So we're obviously very proud. We've taken a lot of lessons learned from this. Picking up to what Lisa was saying earlier, we were able to reach back into our business globally, take a lot of lessons learned from other vertical schools that were done, and we were able to implement this into here. So it's been a long journey, and I'll touch on that in a minute in terms of where we came from to where we are today. But schools like this are going to continue to happen in Australia. Australia's migration is every year is increasing exponentially. There's a lot of people coming to Australia. The cities are getting bigger and bigger, getting second and third cities within each state. So with this comes more people, more students, and the requirement to build these vertical schools in the middle of these cities. So we're proud of this one. It's been a challenge and a long journey, but we're nearly there. So I'll just touching on what I said earlier, this is sort of where we started from. So we were appointed back in 2015, and our role is to provide the New South Wales Department of Education full cost management services. So for those that don't know, cost management is basically we are acting as the client's financial or cost advisor. So through every stage of the design, we are sitting next to the client and advising the client of what the design is costing them. So as the design is going from, one drawing with a couple of sketches, we're able to then start to put numbers on paper to start advising the client, this is going to be the value of the project. As that design is progressing and the drawings go from a pack of 1 to a pack of 20, and we get more specification and engineers are getting involved, we're starting to price that, and we're starting to firm up the number. Throughout that whole process, advising the client of the risks, the opportunities, what we see as ways that we could value engineer in terms of, well, there may be a design that we think is probably too expensive. Is there different alternatives that we could look at that maybe brings it back in line with what the budget for this project is? So we've obviously, this sort of project, as I said earlier, has not been done in Australia before. So we've had to sort of reach back into the business, take a lot of lessons learned, but also look at other projects and benchmark. So when we talk about benchmarking, we're looking at maybe a university project that we've done where we went vertical, looking at a commercial development where it's high rise again, and we're able to benchmark and demonstrate to the client that this is what the cost is for the project. From that point, we've then advised the client this is what we interpret the budget to be. We then go through a procurement strategy where we're looking at different ways that we're going to go out to the market and engage with a contractor. So we explored numbers of different opportunity scenarios. We then helped and supported the contractor, the client engage a contractor. But before all that, there was a design competition that was taking place. So we actually went globally. We reached out to some of the best architects in the world and asked them to come to the table with what they foresee the design to be. Loads of different techniques, those different opportunities to do this high-rise school. And I'll put up a slide in a minute to show you some of the deviations in design. All the designs weren't the same. They're all completely different. They're all really good designs. But part of the process for us was to look at each one of those designs and understand what the budget or the potential budget for those could be. So going through that design competition phase, we obviously selected our preferred designer, which was Grimshaw, another global architectural firm who teamed up with a local Sydney team. They came up with a fantastic design that met all the brief and the requirements of the New South Wales Department of Education. And with that, we were able to move forward and start to really interrogate the design and come up with our budget numbers. So going through the design competition, going through a full design brief, we then engaged our contractor. And then for the past 3.5 years now, we've been constructing. And myself and Dan have been involved in making sure that the financials and the cost during construction are being maintained. So any change or any variation to the design or anything that's happening, latent conditions on the site, myself and Dan are there to support the client and ensure that there's value for money. So the value for money doesn't just happen in design, it also happens during construction. There's so much that happens on site, there's so much change, there's so much happening, there's so many unknowns, which again, in a couple of slides, we'll show you some of the challenges that we had on the site. And it was our job to make sure that those challenges and those risks were captured from a cost perspective, and we were feeding that back into the client to make them aware that what their exposure was from the cost. So our job is not just design, it's also through construction. I think we're probably 5 to 6 months away from completing the project. And again, as I said, we'll probably pick up on some of what those challenges are. So back in 2015, this is where we started. It's a very old school. You can see there's dating back to the 1960. It's very run down, as it was only accommodating up to 400 students, bang in the middle of Parramatta, which prime location. The actual school itself had challenges in terms of there was heritage component to it. The site was riddled with contamination. It was a constrained site. We were working in the middle of a CBD, 2 main roads either side of the school. So a challenge in itself, and one that we had to work closely with the design team and the client to flush out all the risks, I suppose. So this is where it all started back in 2015. We then went through a journey of the International Design Competition, which I touched on before. So you can see the different designs that were coming back from our international architects were all different. They didn't really seem to have the same design technique. So it was an interesting process. It was great to see the different ideas and thoughts that could be put forward by these design competitions. Ultimately, the picture there in the top right is the design that the school went for.
It's slightly different from that design now as well. It has changed, and part of our role on that, just to kind of add to Simon's comments, is that our role was to make sure that the design doesn't creep, there's no scope creep, and we make sure that ultimately we meet the budget that's been set, because it is public money, which is an important point, that, you know, taxpayers in across the country are pretty much paying for the school, and therefore our job is to make sure we get some value for money. Kind of moving on to some of the key challenges with Arthur Phillip, I suppose it's worth just talking a little bit about the history, particularly in Australia. So I'm not sure how many people are aware of this, but Australia has one of the oldest Indigenous or Aboriginal communities in the world, dating back, say, 20,000 years, which not many people are aware of, just how much history is involved in the country. A lot of people think in terms of the European settlement that was 200 to 250 years ago, when the European settlement arrived in Australia, and not many people are aware of that. So the site itself, in particular, because of that, and because of the Parramatta River, which runs pretty much adjacent to the site in which the school, the Parramatta River dates back about 15,000 years, in which a number of different clans and communities from Indigenous cultures have used for fishing, going to their different communities across the river. A couple of the images there that you can see, they use boats in order to kind of travel up and down the river. And so it was a really important piece of both the design and understanding of some of the challenges that we might find on the project, purely because of the history and the Indigenous nature of the area. Ultimately, there's 29 different clans within Sydney, and they're basically a community of the Eora Nation. And that's a really, in Australia, it's a really important point to make, because pretty much everything that we do, particularly now, has a real emphasis on the Indigenous culture, and how we approach projects, and how we pretty much try and approach life, really, to make sure that it's acknowledged that the first people of the land and their significance in terms of the history of Australia and how things kind of have evolved over the years. The next slide that I show you is in particular around the early settlement of the European culture that arrived in Australia, so 250 years ago, because a lot of the artifacts that were found, and one of the key challenges was the archaeology on the site. So as you can see by the slide, there was 20,000 artifacts found on site, which resulted in quite large delays. There was probably over 100 archaeologists on site at one point, going through every single artifact that they found, which caused relatively large delays on the site. And we had to look at ways in which we could mitigate those delays, and look whether there was any phasing that we could undertake in order to kind of speed the project up. Some of the things that were found was one British penny from 1885. In today's money, it could be worth up to between £5 and £215, depending on the condition of the penny, which was quite significant. There was an old medicine bottle, partial leather shoe that was found, a bone toothbrush handle. So they used to use bone in order to have for their toothbrush, which is a bit odd, but you had to do what you had to do back then. A partial bell as well, which was found, and then there's an old cellar, which was only recently. Well, I say recently. It was found probably about a year into the dig, or the build, should I say? where they found the old cellar, and ultimately what they've done now is they've had to keep the old cellar and they put a glazed roof over the top, so that you keep a bit of the rich history that the site's got, and people are able to look down and look into the cellar. So that's one of the, I suppose, the challenges that we had to incorporate into the design. And the other one is the heritage wall at the back of the site. And it's quite amazing, really, because it's still there, and you can see the anchors in which they used to chain the convicts to. So I don't know how much everybody knows about the Australian history, but a lot of the British convicts used to get sent over to Australia almost as, I suppose, punishment. And in this particular case, they found a heritage wall which still had the anchors in which some of the convicts had been chained to, and were used in terms of working, and a lot of it was for farm work and agriculture, etc. So that was quite a key find, and one of the challenges that we had to work through on the site.
So just to touch on that and to take it the next step, the challenge that myself and Dan had on the project was that, when we first looked at this site back in 2015, the extent of archaeology in the ground was unknown at the time. And as you know, archaeologists coming onto the site and doing their digs, Dan touched on it, number of delays that were happening, all this cost money. So during the design phase, the unknowns such as archaeology and the extent of it were a challenge in terms of trying to put budget numbers against it and advising the client around what that cost risk is to them. So again, it's something that we had to work through as a team, both with geotech engineers, archaeologists, basically advising on what the history is around that site. So again, huge challenge for us in terms of trying to capture a cost risk while all this is happening.
Okay, and a couple of other challenges that we faced was contamination. So as well as the archaeology, pretty much the whole site was contaminated with what we call over here general solid waste, so GSW, and this is quite an expensive material. It's pretty much just it's old rubble, really. So the site was contaminated with old rubble, asbestos. As you can see by the picture on the left, there's a mound of asbestos. So the site was also covered in a lot of asbestos, which had to be removed. And again, just to Simon's point, these are all expensive issues and challenges which we needed to work through. So particularly with, say, for example, with the asbestos, we had to look at whether we could bury it rather than take it off site. Excuse me, because it's a lot more expensive to take it off site than it is to actually bury the asbestos. And Tony, more recently, there's on one of the other sites, we found hazardous waste, which is again a very expensive material. So that could be anything from hazardous liquids, petrol, that's been found on the site, and that is a really expensive material which we have to remove from site. So even up to, we're 6 months away from completing the project, and even up to now, we're still finding hazardous waste and GSW. We've cleared that, cleared all the site now, so hopefully we won't find any more, but that's one of the challenges that we've had to overcome. And also one of the other key challenges that we faced was that there's two buildings that are being kept on the site, the heritage buildings from the 1875, Heritage A and Heritage B. Unfortunately, Heritage A had an arson attack halfway through the build, which basically pretty much burnt the whole building, and we were pretty much the roof was completely burnt out and demolished ultimately. So, but the client decided, along with the council, that we needed to still keep the building, and therefore we've had to undertake, almost as part of an insurance, because it was an insurance claim, but we've almost had to undertake a complete rectification of that building, which again caused time and cost, which we've had to recover. And that was a big part of one of the challenges that we've had to face on the project. In terms of, because of these challenges, one of the aspects that we had to take on board was trying to save program. And a way in which that was discussed and how it could be done was to change the design from a concrete structure to a steel structure. Now, in America and in the UK, steel construction is a lot more common. It's readily used quite often. In Australia, it's not necessarily, it's still common, but it's not necessarily the most go-to form of construction. A lot of things are built in concrete. And this particular building was designed to be in concrete. However, to try and save program, they decided to undertake a steel form of construction, which had its own challenges because the contractor wasn't necessarily entirely experienced in the steel construction, which caused some difficulties. But the design was changed to reflect that. Some of the advantages was that steel construction requires far less site-based people and therefore safer. So when you have a wet trade like concrete, there's a lot more people on site because you've got concrete, you've got reinforcement, and you've got formwork, which are 3 different trades that need to come together, and therefore a lot more people on site. So the steel manufacturing was safer because some of the steel pieces can be cut off site and then brought to site and then just constructed on site. The availability of steel is generally widely available in Australia, so that was a key plus. So as well as international, so Australia do import steel from China and other countries to help with the need for steel, and also steel is 20% lighter. So if you can imagine, you've got concrete and steel columns, they've all got to sit on a foundation, so they've all got to be sitting on either a piled foundation or a pad foundation. Those foundations could be lighter and therefore save money, which was a key aspect which we were reviewing in terms of cost savings on the project.
Just to touch on that, and just to take it a little bit further, when I talked about the process that we went through in terms of our role on the project, we were the cost manager. We were basically involved in exploring all these different options with the client. So the client wanted to understand, well, what if I built it in concrete? What does that mean for me? What if I built it in steel? What does that mean for me? What if I had a hybrid? What if I have some of it in concrete and some of it in steel? What does it mean for me from a program? What does it mean for me from a cost? What does it mean for me from a risk? And our job was to work with the design team, the architect, and the engineers to understand what that meant. So we were ultimately then presenting back to the client, well, should you go steel or concrete or hybrid? This is what it means for you. This is what it means for me from a cost, and this is what it means for me from a program. So program and cost are hand in hand all the time. So our role was then to advise the client, well, if you go down this particular route, it's going to cost X. If you go down this Y, there was many different facets and many different scenarios that were explored. Once we had the international designer on board, there was all these options were explored. So it was a great learning curve for myself. I learned so much of the different engineering techniques that have been adopted. And I can then now take that experience onto my next job and demonstrate to my other clients some of the lessons learned that we took from this project that we could bring to theirs. So just a different sort of dynamic to what we were doing in terms of as a team. This next one is a time lapse. I think it goes for maybe 1.5 minutes. And apologies, I probably should have given context on the site at the start. So on the left-hand side, that's the high school. So that's the Arthur Phillip High School, and that's where the tower sits, just at the back of the site there. The building that you can see at the front, that's the old gym, which you'll see gets knocked down. And then on the right-hand side, it's the primary school. So the primary school is a horseshoe-shaped design, and the different design techniques. So the high school is a steel building, which Dan just touched on. The primary school is a concrete structure. So we had 2 different construction methodologies happening on the site, and they were almost run as 2 separate projects because there was a main road that you can probably see across. So the idea is for school kids to go through the public school on the right, and as they go through their school life, they're going into the high school, And then just behind, to the north of the site, is the university. So it's almost a public high school campus going into a university, and that's what the department were looking for. So I'll click on the time lapse just to give you an indication of what was going on site. Hopefully. So hopefully that just gives you a feel for what was happening on site. Obviously the time lapse hadn't taken it to the end, but we are probably, as I said, 5 months away from finishing, due to finish around April, May this year. It's been an exciting project. We've had some really big challenges in archaeology, contamination, and arson attacks. So it's been a great experience. And at the end, we can pick up any questions that people might have about the site, or a bit more about the challenges that we went through. But
some of the fun facts for the project, this is my favorite one really, is the students know break time's arrived when they hear music. So years 9 and 10 hear Mozart. I don't know how many people are familiar with Mozart, but and with years 11 and 12 they hear Bach. So rather than your traditional bell for break, they hear music, which I think is quite a good feature. I quite like that. They're still used on the building, as we discussed and touched on, is if melted down would fill an entire Olympic swimming pool. So there's a lot of steel on the building, and it would, if covered, it's 19,000 square meters of paint when covered, which is the equivalent of 4 American football fields and 36 basketball courts. So again, a lot of paint in terms of the steelwork, and then there's 10 miles of electrical cable in the building. Cabling in the building, so a lot of obviously electrical works with the sides of the building. It's 17 stories high, so it's it's a big building. And as we talked about previously, there's 20,000 archaeological items found on site. So a lot of different items, and as I say, there was 100 archaeologists on site at one point, which was significant, very significant. Kind of finds. And across Parramatta, you would probably find a lot of that, particularly so close to the river, as I mentioned previously. You'd find a lot of archaeology and from different settlements throughout, both from indigenous and also from the European settlement. So it was really exciting that in the early stages in terms of some of those finds and what the project had to kind of deal with as challenges.
So I just probably to pick up from where we started, where I was sort of discussing where Australia is coming on from a migration point of view. A lot of our major cities across the country are experiencing the same thing, where huge urban density, a lot of population growth in these major hubs. And with that, obviously, comes a lot of families migrating to these major cities, and obviously the requirement for public schools. So we're working across a number of vertical schools across the country, I know Dan's also working on the Alexandra Park there, top left. But just in Sydney alone, they got the Surrey Hills one, which is probably 5 or 10 kilometers just outside of the CBD where we are. Again, another requirement for a vertical school. And then down in Adelaide, which is South Australia, our team down there have finished a vertical school down there. So I don't think this is going to be the end of it. I think Australia will probably experience many more vertical schools, and they'll all be different types and different techniques and different. But I think we have got a lot of lessons learned, a lot of benchmarking, a lot of experience on these vertical schools in Australia and globally. So it's something that we are, as a team, quite proud of. These are just some random images of the school to give you context. You can see probably top left the huge floor plates. I think there were 7-meter floor-to-floor spaces, so not your typical classroom where it's probably only a 3-meter, 3.5-meter floor-to-floor. These are over 7 meters, so big open spaces is what they were going for here.
Yeah, and it's also worth noting the idea is future focused learning. So it's not necessarily everybody sitting in front of sitting in a row listening to the teacher. It's more kind of collaborative approach where the kids work together, and it's less formal, should I say, really. So there's a lot of spaces that were designed in that respect, because Australia see that as a kind of a big learning curve and how teaching should be delivered, which is something that's kind of being pushed out across a lot of schools at the moment.
I think that takes us to the end. So
yeah.
Lisa, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add, but happy to take questions, happy to answer anything that you may want to know more about.
Great. No, that was very exciting. Thank you very much for taking us through. That was very interesting to see. I especially loved personally the bit about the archaeology and how that had to be taken into consideration and during construction. So very informative. Thank you very much. We do have a few questions that have come in here. The first one is, let's see, how environmentally friendly is the school building?
It's a good question.
That is a good question, yeah.
It's not sounding too technical, it's got passive ventilation. So you have a permeable facade. So there's 2 facades, and basically what they're looking for is ventilation to be going across the building. So you're using less of the mechanical or air conditioning system, and you're allowing natural airflow through the building. So it's literally permeable facade around the whole building, which then the idea is to reduce the extent of air conditioning that you're using. Out in Parramatta, it gets extremely hot. It gets what we call 42 degrees Celsius. I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit, which is extremely hot. So the air conditioning is a requirement at the school, but from other techniques that we were using from sustainability, I think a lot of the earth that we were removing from site, we actually kept and we're using as part of the landscaping across the site. So
yeah. There's also large rainwater tanks as well for reuse of rainwater for the toilet systems, etc. So that's another element which they use to try and increase the sustainability aspect of the project.
It is a good question, and I know sustainability is a hot topic in the market at the moment. With it being a public school, the focus wasn't too much on that sustainability, but there is sustainability techniques throughout the building.
Great, thank you. And I think that kind of speaks to the next question, which was, does the building use renewable energy? I think you've hit a few examples there, unless there's anything else to hit on.
No, I think we've sort of covered off on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
The next one is, how do students get around? Do they walk all the stairs, or are there huge elevators?
Yeah, so there's 6 banks of lifts, and the start times at school is staggered. So you'll have years 6s and 7s starting. They'll come in, they'll go to their particular floors, and then the next couple of years will come in and they go to their floors. So I think each year has, I think it's 2 floors each, and there's interconnecting staircases between those 2 floors. And then as you progress through your school life, you're basically going up the building. So those 6 banks of lifts are used non-stop. Just kids going.
I'd like to point out that those lifts weren't there when we had to do our site walks. So we had to walk up the 17 stories when we were doing our site walks, which was sometimes quite painful. So yeah, anyway.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, interesting indeed. The next question is, does Australia have free public schooling through 12th grade?
Yes.
Yes,
Does,
it does, yeah.
So it's they've got both. They've got public and private schools. Public is free up to your year 12.
Yeah.
Okay, great. And Paulette informed us that 42 Celsius is 108 degrees Fahrenheit. So thank you, Paulette. Appreciate that.
Yeah. It gets very hot everywhere.
Do you think vertical schools will replace conventionally spread out buildings in the future?
No, I don't think so. I think we'll probably just see vertical schools happening in our heavily urbanized centers where you've got huge population growths in your major CBD areas. You'll probably see vertical schools. Out in the suburban areas, probably not. You're probably not going to get a vertical school out in the suburbans, but I think, if you go to, just take Hong Kong as an example, everything's vertical. So I think all their schools move, but in Australia, there's a lot of land. But when it gets to the city centre areas, that's where we're probably going to start to see more of these vertical schools.
Yeah. And I think that speaks to a few of the questions on here about, what is the point of vertical schools and the concept of them and when you use them. So it really is when you have, a little bit of land space, not much, and you can really only go up to get the floor space that you need.
Yeah, and it's the cost of land. So the cost of land in these CBD is huge, and you can't just go buying huge land masses to put public schools, which again, to Dan's point, it's public money. You got to be spending the money properly and not just going and spending and buying huge masses of land.
Yeah, so without wanting to get too technical, to give you context, so what the Australian government or New South Wales government mandate is that you have to have 10 square meters per student of play space. And if it doesn't have that, then, so for example, on Alexandra Park, one of the projects you saw, which was one of my projects, we didn't have that. So we have play space on the roof. So the entire school's roof is play space. So it has a sports pitch on the ground floor, but that's not enough space. So what we've had to do is look at play space on the roof. So there's basketball courts, etc., on the roof of the school in order to achieve that space. Otherwise, we probably would have had to have gone up another floor and created a floor which was play space. So they're the sort of innovative solutions that inner city schools need to look at because of population growth.
Okay, thank you. And another question, do you think that vertical schools will become popular in America? That might be a question for me, right?
Lisa, I'll leave that one to you.
Yeah, I mean, we already do see some of those in city centers and more urban areas. We have, even in Nashville here, it's an older building, but it's, not quite as vertical as this one, but you do seem to find the smaller footprints in some of those markets. I don't think, similar to Australia, I don't think it's going to replace the more spread out schools in the more rural areas, but I do think, you could see a little bit more of that here going forward. Education now, has changed a bit, of course, with, the situation in 2020. So it'll be interesting to see how that impacts school design in the coming year as well. One question, a couple more questions here coming in. Are students only on their floor? For example, are 6th grade only on their floor for that year, or do they have classes on other floors?
They generally operate, there's 2 floors per year, and they switch between 2 floors. So there's an interconnecting staircase, and you go between your classes or your lessons over those 2 floors.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very good. And it looks like one of the comments here from Nia is that there's a few vertical schools in Seattle near to downtown. So it looks like we already see some examples of that here in the U.S. Here's a fun question. What is your favorite building that you and your team have ever built, and why?
Was
it this one, or was it something different, you think?
Well, For me, I'll talk to me first. I'd probably say this is probably one of the my favorites because of the challenge. It wasn't as straightforward. It had never been done before in Australia, so it's the first of its kind in Australia. It wasn't just a straight, easy build. We faced so many different challenges, and you know, it also got a bit of a public attention as well. Because it was the first of its kind in Australia. Sort of the media were also around it, so it had a lot of focus, and I learned everything from the different construction techniques and the different methodologies of how to build. I'd say this is, for me, it's probably one of my favorites.
Yeah, mine would probably be back in the UK. I think I worked on a major campus, university campus, a brand new one, which had similar sort of thing in terms of it had a building which had been had a fire. It was an old engine shed which had to be restored. And then I suppose the other one would probably be Kew Gardens. So I worked on the rectification of Kew Gardens Temperate House, which is I don't know if anybody whoever's been to London knows, may have been to Kew Gardens, and there's a big glass house. It's massive. And put it this way, it took a year to remove the plants from that building, to decant the plants. So it was really complicated and a really challenging project. And it was actually opened by the Queen. So a real challenging project, which was probably one of my favorites that I've worked on.
Very good. Thank you. Another question here. What were you able to learn from the vertical schools in China, Japan, and other cities with many dense populations? And what did you apply to this design?
Yeah, good question. So some of the biggest lessons learned was the transportation of kids up and down the school and how that was done. So if you think about it, on this particular school, in the high school alone anyway, there could be eventually at its capacity, there'll be 2,500 students going up and down this building. So the techniques we learned around how do you get those kids up and down lifts? How do you get them to their different classes, you know, at the end of each hour? And what does that look like when you've got 2,500 kids moving across the school? The different other techniques is the different types of facades that were to be used on a school building. You don't want it to look like a jail. You don't want it to look like a normal school with brick. You want it to have a bit of character. You want the kids to actually want to come to school and learn. So there was the stuff that was going in the building. You can probably see on that picture, actually, there is no actual ceilings. So when the kids look up, they can see all the cabling, all the fire sprinkler heads, all the fire sprinkler piping, all the duct work, and we're able to give lectures on what does that all mean? What does all the ducts in the roof mean? What does all the cabling mean? What does all the piping mean? So it's not just a typical bog standard school where you got a ceiling and you can't see any of the intricacies of the services. So we did take those sort of lessons and wanting the kids to come to school and being in an environment that they're comfortable and not just a concrete block.
Well, I think that speaks to this last question here around fire safety as well. If there's sprinklers throughout the building, then certainly that's going to help encourage the kids to feel safe in that environment.
Yeah, one thing that we did learn, and was a huge task that we went through, was the fire paint to the steel. So the fire resistant paint, or the intumescent paint, was really thick, really thick, and because it was all exposed steel, so the actual steel is exposed, it's not boxed out in any way, it hasn't got like a concrete block, a column around it, it's all exposed. So the intumescent paint that was applied to all the structural steel was really thick and had to go through all sorts of testing, rigorous testing and requirements. And I think the engineers had to reach back globally to get all sorts of lessons learned that they had on exposed steel. So It was a big task.
Yeah, and it'll also it'll be similar to in America, where they have regulations around fire and what needs to happen in a building. So Australia has, I think it's 25 meters, anything over 25 meters, mandatory, has to have sprinklers. It will also depend on the density, the amount of people. So there'll be a number of things that dictate that you have to have sprinklers. And this building would definitely, especially the use of the building, would dictate that you have to have sprinklers in the building. Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much. And last question, then I'll turn it over to you, Paulette, to close out. You mentioned this is the first one in the region. Are there other vertical schools in Australia since this one's been completed, or more being planned?
So this is the first vertical in terms of, this is 17 stories high, or the equivalent of 17 stories. There is other vertical schools happening that are probably 6 to 10 stories, but this is the first true vertical high-rise school in Australia, and probably not going to be the last.
Yeah. Well, what they're also finding, just to finalise that, is we're actually looking at some schools that are in commercial towers. So you could get a 20-story commercial tower which has a school in the middle of it. And some people a commercial tower and residential towers. So people can live in the tower and then to take their child downstairs to school, or the child goes downstairs to school, or whatever it might be, or go to work and drop their kids off to school in the tower that they work in. And looking at ways how that can be done safely. So that's something that Australia is looking at as well. Across the piece, kind of, I suppose, innovative ways of integrating community. So it's not just about school, it's about the whole community, and shops, schools, offices. How do we turn an urban environment into a place where people want to go and, go for dinner, or, whatever that might be. So school during the day, dinner at night type approach.
Yep. Great. Thank you very much, both of you. Again, really interesting, really appreciate it. I learned a lot as well. And Paulette, turn it over to you to close out.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, you guys. That was amazing. I learned a ton. It was really, really fun. And now I'm going to put Australia vertical schools on my to see list in real life as soon as we can start moving around. So I'll be coming to visit you guys. But anyway, thanks again so much. And thanks everybody for joining today. Look, there's another, ACE Venture next week. So thank you very, very much. We really appreciate it for everyone taking their time and logging in. And thank you, Simon and Dan, for calling in from Australia. This has been great. And thank you, Lisa, from Nashville. This has been awesome. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great
Thank
day.
you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.